So, ladies and gentlemen, and assembled company, welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. And tonight, despite earlier publicity suggesting that the spinner was doing it tonight, I've got he's almost as good looking. Uh, he just needs a little more hair. We've got the wonderful Keith Rogers, who had previously asked if he could do tonight, and I said no, the spinner's doing it. She asked ages ago, and of course, I was completely misled by my own memory cells. So, can you please welcome Keith Rogers, who's going to do? I believe you're doing stuff from Egypt,
That's
Egyptian
right.
stories tonight.
Stories from Egypt.
Marvelous, marvelous. And if I disappear, it's just because the computer hasn't held out for the length of this program. Okay.
Well, if you should abruptly leave us, I will attempt to fill your footsteps.
Ah, yeah. But remember, there is on Sunday. There's a worldwide story round,
Yes.
and then there's you next Friday. But
Yes.
next
Yes.
Saturday at 10 o'clock in the morning UK time, there's another story round which will be so the people who can't normally get to the story round, like those in Australia and so forth, can be on it. So, and India and the Far East and all those feast people. So it's an exciting. That was the Beta's idea, and I was already planning one. So between us, we decided on next Saturday because it's quite near World Storytelling Day, but it's sort of not on it because we at the World Storytelling Cafe do things differently.
That's why we're the World Storytelling Cafe.
Hello, Dawn. How are you? Right. As it's story of children, well, hello. Louis seems to have disappeared. He's just left us with his magnificent bridge. Hello, Louis. How are you, Louis? Brilliant.
Oh no, he's down. Oh no.
Yeah, no, he's just having a little swim
Ah.
below the bridge. Okay, Keith, I'm going to stop rattling on and hand over to you.
Thank you very much, John, and welcome everybody. Nice to see Dawn in the cafe. Really nice. Hi, Babs. Thank you for coming along. Hans, I think you're there behind that picture, as is Avita. And I have some stories from Egypt, and I'm lucky enough to have an Egyptian friend who supplies me with stories and books of traditional tales. So these tales are not the Egyptian stories that you might expect from Ramesses and Nefertiti, but they are ordinary folk tales. Ordinary. Let's see how ordinary they are, because I'd like to begin with the story of Labakan, the tailor of Alexandria. And Labakan was a fine tailor. He worked for his master in his master's shop, and his work was complimented by all who came in. But Labakan's problem was that he thought he was really high-born. And he had a fine robe that he wore on a Friday when he went to the mosque. And he'd walk in with his nose in the air, and his friends who had known him all his life from his humble beginnings, but smiled and said, Labakan, good to see you. You're looking well. You are looking fine. You are looking almost regal. And Labakan loved that, and he would give them a wave and a smile and take his place in the mosque. Unfortunately, it got beyond him. For one day, he was asked to mend the robe of the Sultan's brother. And there it stood on the mannequin in the shop, a jewel-encrusted robe. And he made the essential measurements, and he mended a small part under the sleeve that could hardly be seen. And he worked on it until everyone else in the shop had gone home, and there he was on his own. And he looked at this robe and he thought to himself, how I would look in that robe. And he couldn't resist. Took his own robe off and he put the Sultan's brother's robe on, and it did fit perfectly. And when he stood before the mirror, he did look fine. This, he thought to himself, is my destiny. He left the shop, already dressed in the Sultan's brother's robe. He went to his home and collected up all his savings. And he set off. He left Alexandria and he set off. And as he went on his way, it was dusty and dirty and desert-like, as you know, and it clings to you a bit. And people revered him. They saw this man walking through their villages and towns, and he must be somebody wearing that robe. And he enjoyed it. And he spent his money freely, eating in bars and bars, cafes. But he grew tired. He grew tired, and when he counted his money, he couldn't buy a fine horse, but he could buy a tired-looking horse. And when he climbed upon his back with his pack, it walked very slowly indeed. But that was okay, because it meant he didn't have to walk himself. And he set off on his way, way across the desert. And as he was traveling, he heard a noise behind him, a noise of thundering hooves. And when he looked over his shoulder, he saw a cloud of dust as a rider approached fast. But as the rider came level with him, he slowed right down. And he said, a good idea to have a companion on my journey. Would you mind, sir, if I rode with you? A young man a bit younger than him, but a good companion nonetheless, as they chatted away, as they walked along on their horses, and they stopped for the night, and they built a fire. And he got some cheese and food out of his bag, and he had some bread, and the young man had some food as well, and they shared it. Very companionable. And the old young man told him his story. And he took out a beautiful dagger. And he said, I've just found out, I am 21 years old, and I have just found out that my mother and father aren't my real parents. But I was brought to them as a baby for my safety. And on my 21st birthday, I should take this dagger to the great hill outside Alexandria. And then there I will meet a party of men. And I am to say these words, here is the dagger I have come with. I have returned. Just those simple words. And Labakan said, what happens next? What happens next? He said, I don't know. My father just said, take this to the hill. They slept heavily that night. And Labakan woke first, and he looked at the dagger and he thought, this young man is high-born. Something special awaits him on that hill. Now, he wasn't a bad man, he wasn't a villainous man, but he was already a vain man who could be tempted. And quietly, he took the dagger, climbed on the young man's steed, and galloped off into the distance. And after half a day's travel, he came to the hill outside Alexandria, where there was an old building of stone all fallen down. And he stood for a while, and then he saw in the distance a party of men arriving, and it was obvious immediately that they were high-born by their robes. And their leader stepped from his steed and marched over. And Labakan held out the dagger and said, I am here with this dagger. I have returned. And the man hugged him, for he was the king. He was the king, and the prince was his son, who had been sent away to keep him safe during an insurrection in the country. And as we all know, the heir to the throne is so much more in danger. And a spare horse had been brought with them, for they were expecting this to happen. And they took him back to the palace. And the palace was decked out with fine silks and robes and decorations. And they marched triumphantly into the great hall. My son has returned, called the king. And everyone cheered and they clapped. And the queen stepped down from her throne, and she looked at Labakan, and she turned to the king and said, this is not my son. For all these years I have dreamed, and this is not the face I have seen. This is not my son. Now the king was annoyed. He was not used to being contradicted. Let me test him, he said. And as they spoke, there was a great commotion outside the castle. And the prince on the old nag came riding into the courtyard, shouting, I am the prince, I am the prince. That man in the hall is a meagre tailor. And the soldiers dragged him back. But the queen shouted, bring him forth, bring him forth. And as he was brought in, she said nothing, but she knew that this was the face she had seen in her dreams. And the king, biting back his annoyance, but deferring to his queen, said, what is your test? And she said, fetch some material, give them to both. They can make me a jacket tonight, and in the morning they can show me it. And Labakan thought, this is great. This is great. This is a task I can do. And he made a fine jacket in the night, and they both came out with their jackets in the morning. And there was Labakan's, the one he had made, a fine jacket, great stitching. And there was the prince's with one arm longer than the other, and they didn't button up properly, and part of it fell off as he handed it over. And the queen laughed and said, there you are, sire. Who is the tailor and who is the prince? And the king was furious, for everyone around saw that he had been wrong, but he wasn't willing to admit it. The place went quiet, and the king retired to his chambers. And that evening he went out up on the hill to the oracle. And she was waiting for him, for she was expecting him. I know your dilemma, she says. And I have a test for those young men. And she gave him 2 wooden boxes, beautiful wooden boxes with silver hinges and locks and jewel encrusted. And on top of one was written on a little plaque, wealth and happiness. On the other, honor and glory. And they were taken down to the great hall, and the next morning Labakan was brought in on his own. And they said, you must choose one of these boxes. And he read the top, wealth and glory, and his eyes lit up. And he looked, honor and glory, and immediately he said, what a wealth it is to have happiness, to be confirmed as your son, sire. That is the box I will choose. He was taken out, and the prince was brought in, still huffily, still angry. And he looked at the 2 boxes carefully. And he says, I have already seen that wealth and happiness are ephemeral, and they could go with the dust of the desert. But honor and glory last forever. A silence fell over the room as Labakan was brought in and the two young men stood. A servant opened the wealth and happiness box, and there inside, strangely, was a needle and thread. When she opened the honor and glory box, there was a tiny crown. And the king came forward and he picked up the crown. And as he picked it up, it grew. It grew until it fitted perfectly onto the prince's head. And everyone cheered and clapped, and the king sighed, and he saw the smile on his wife's face. And then with a scowl, he turned to Labakan. And Labakan knelt, seeking mercy, for he knew the penalty for what he had done. But the prince intervened. The prince intervened, saying, "He could have stabbed me with that dagger as I slept, and then no one would have guessed. Let him be free, but banished from the country." So the prince became the prince, consort, and later the king, and ruled the country wisely. Labakan, meanwhile, set off. He could not go back to Alexandria, so he set off for Cairo. And there he had this beautiful jewel-encrusted box. And he sold it, and he made enough money to open a tailor's shop. And as he sat in the tailor's shop with his needle and thread, people knew he was a very good tailor, and his reputation grew, and he understood that his airs and graces were misplaced. So everyone in the story lived happily ever after. Thank you. Thank you. And now I would like to take you to Memphis. Now, when people say Memphis, we think of Memphis, Tennessee, don't we? But it's not. It's Memphis in Lower Egypt. And the king, sorry, Baba, it's not Memphis in America. It's Memphis in Lower Egypt. And back in the distance of time, the king of Lower Egypt invited the king of Nubia to a state visit. And you can understand the regal, the celebrations, everything that would take place when a king and his entourage visit from another country. They want to be shown how fine a country Lower Egypt is. And everything was planned. Everywhere he was taken was planned. And the finale was a great feast, and there would be entertainment. And the feast was magnificent. Table after table of food and wine and mead, and everyone supped and ate and had that wonderful feeling that you have when you've eaten your fill. And now they were all spread out in a huge, huge marquee, bigger than our marquee in Morocco, for there were over 100 people in there. And they were seated according to their rank. So the kings and their wives and their families, the children all sat on the floor at the front, and the grand viziers sat by them with their wives. And according to your station, you went further and further back. And there were musicians playing, and dancers, and songs were sung, and stories were told. And the finale of the entertainment were the magicians. Now, the competition between the king of Nubia's dancers and magicians and storytellers was huge. But his magician was known throughout the world. as the finest musician there is. And he was a huge man, and he was 7 foot tall with a turban on his head and a wonderful robe as he marched in. And there was the table there. And on the table was a piece of string and a coin and a pack of cards, not dissimilar to the cards we use today. And everyone watched, for they knew that the Egyptian king's magician was equally well known. And this would be a fine competition. The Nubian magician stepped forward and he took the string. And with a great wave of the string, he called forward a servant with a pair of scissors, and they cut the string. And he held the 2 pieces for everyone to see. And everyone was agog, waiting for, we all love magicians' tricks, don't we? And with a great flourish, he tied a very complicated knot. And then when he pulled it clear, the string was in one piece again. And everyone clapped and cheered, and what a sight it was. He then took the cards. He took the cards and walked along the front. Now, he wouldn't speak to the kings or the queens, but he asked the Grand Vizier's wife to take a card, and she chose one and held it up so the audience could see. And he stood there and he put it back in the pack, and then where those complicated shuffles, he ran it up and down, and he placed the block of cards on the table, cut it in half, and took out the top card and held it up. And the audience cheered and laughed, for it was the card that the Grand Vizier's wife had chosen. And finally he picked up the coin, and he did that thing that they can do with one hand, where they flicked the coin between the fingers, and he went back and forth, and he twirled it round, and he went, no coin. And he walked forward to a small boy sitting at the front and reached in his ear and took out the coin with a flourish, and everyone cheered and clapped. What a fine magician he was. And then he stood back, and the king's magician came from behind a curtain. But with him, he had a tiny boy of about 9 or 10 years old, dressed in a beautiful robe with a turban. And they gasped, is the boy going to compete with the Nubian magician? But the boy stepped forward, a little nervous but confident, as his father introduced him. Didi, here, my son, will entertain you. And the boy walked forward and very respectfully asked the Grand Vizier's wife for her conical hat, which he handed over. And he went forward to the table, and he held the hat up to show it was empty. And then he placed it on the table, and everyone watched and waited. And when he pulled it up, 6 mice ran around, jumped off the table and ran around. The children squealed, everyone laughed. The Nubian magician looked on a little patronizingly. He knew how these tricks worked. But the boy carried on. And he placed the conical hat on the table again and picked it up, and 4 doves flew into the air. And this was even more impressive, and people clapped and cheered. But the Nubian magician was not over impressed. And finally, the boy placed the conical hat on the table. And he picked it up, placed it aside, and there was the cobra. And the audience gasped, and they watched, and they held their breath as the great cobra began to sway. And it swayed, and it turned toward the boy, And the audience, you could have heard a pin drop as they watched, as it drew back as though it was about to strike. And as it started to come forward, the boy clapped his hands and there was a puff of smoke and the cobra vanished. Everyone gasped with relief and then cheered and clapped. And the Nubian magician marched forward and he held the boy's arm up as a boxer who's won the fight. And that small boy, Didi, became one of the greatest musicians in history. And there are writings on papyrus about him from ancient Egypt. That is the story of the Memphis magician. Now, there was once a king in the ancient times, and the king was wealthy beyond compare. If you imagine his palace was decked with marble halls and walls, and on those walls were tapestries with jewel encrusted, and the carpets came from far and wide to the most wonderful carpet makers in the world, and they had the fine patterns and that quality, that touch when you stood on them. But his favourite place in the palace was his atrium. Inside the walls, an open space with a stone bench, and there was a pond, and the pond was populated with exotic fish from all over the world, and there were shrubs and flowers from every corner of the world. You can imagine the scent that they would take in. And in the little trees and bushes, there were birds from everywhere you can imagine, colourful and beautiful songs. And the king would sit on his stone bench and he would smell those flowers and he could watch his fish swimming backwards and forth and listen to those wonderful birds singing. And right in the middle, towering over everything else, was a eucalyptus tree. This was his favourite place in the whole world. Now, one day, he was out riding with his entourage, and he passed a village, a big village, quite a well-populated place. And on the edge of the village, there were fields, as there always are, but unusually in the middle of the field was a huge tree. And halfway up the tree, on a branch, was an iguana. The king stopped his horse in his tracks and looked up. That iguana would look wonderful in his atrium. What an addition that would be. So he sent out a proclamation. Anyone who can capture that iguana and bring it to the palace would get a bag of gold. Word soon spread, and the first to come were the strong, and they would come and shake the tree, and the iguana would hang on tight and look down at them with disdain. Sometimes they would come in twos and threes, thinking to share a bag of gold, and shake the tree anymore, and the iguana just hang on tightly and gave him that look again. Next came the athletes. The athletes, the ones who could climb up the tree, the light and svelte. But the iguana saw them coming, and the iguana just looked and rolled his eyes and climbed further up the tree until he got to those branches that wouldn't hold their weight, and they had to climb back down again defeated. And all these shenanigans going on, attracted a crowd, as you could imagine. The people of the village found this really entertaining as all these people from all over tried to win a bag of gold and they all failed, and they would all stand and laugh and jeer, and sometimes they made up songs about them, and they would all trail away and wait for the next to come. But the king became frustrated. Whoever catches that iguana shall have a bag of gold and my daughter's hand in marriage. The people of the village were shocked. They had heard of this offer in stories, of course, many times, but never thought it would be real. Offer your daughter's hand in marriage to a stranger because they catch an iguana, but no one said a word. No one said a word. The king was becoming frustrated. This time, a group of clever people came. I look around this assembled company and it could be you, for they used persuasion. They flattered the iguana. They told the iguana how wonderful it would be to live in an atrium. And if only you came down, what a lucky iguana you would be. The iguana sighed. He liked his tree and he was going nowhere. And they failed as well. But before the crowd could disperse, a young man in peasant's clothes, nothing on his feet. Young man in peasant's clothes arrived. He had a dog and a goat and a bag on his back. And the people started to jeer and laugh before he'd done anything, because how could a peasant succeed when all these other august people had failed? The boy ignored them but carried on. He collected some wood, he collected some of the lush grass from the edge of the clearing. He took a pot out of his bag and he built a fire, and he put the pot on, put some water in the pot and put some oats in and stirred it up. And they all watched, intrigued. And he said nothing. He tied the dog up over there and the goat further along. And when the porridge was ready, he got a wooden bowl and he filled it up and he took it over to the goat. And the goat sniffed. And he put it down by the fire and he went over and get the lush grass, and he went over to the dog and he offered to feed the dog with the grass. And the dog went. And he picked up the bowl again and went over to the goat, and the goat pulled a face and pulled away, and he picked up the grass, went to the dog, and the dog did the same thing. And people were watching, thinking, what's he doing now? He's got this all wrong, hasn't he? What's he doing? He did it about 4 or 5 times, and in the end, the iguana shouted down, "What are you thinking of? What are you thinking of? You give the porridge to the dog and the grass to the goat. Surely you know that's what they eat." And the boy looked up as though he was daft and said, "What? What? Grass? Porridge? What do you mean?" He said, "You give the porridge to the dog and the grass to the goat, for goodness sake." He said, "But haven't I tried that?" He said, "No, you haven't tried that." And in the end, the iguana was so irritated, he climbed down from the tree, marched over, picked up the grass, gave it to the goat, picked up the porridge, gave it to the dog. And as he turned round to go, "There you are," the boy grabbed him and stuck him in the bag and pulled it tight shut. And there's a great commotion as the iguana fought back, but it was too late. It was too late. The iguana was in the bag. Everyone suddenly realized what he was up to, and they all laughed and they cheered, and they thought, he's going to get a bag of gold now for being clever, and he's going to marry the princess. Peasant. They weren't so keen on that bit. But nonetheless, the boy set off with his goat and his dog for the palace. And he arrived at the palace gates, and the guards stood there with their great pikes and crossed them over and said, "Stay." He said, "The king will want me to come in. I've got the iguana in the bag." "Oh," they said, they had heard all about this. and they opened the gates for him. And he strolled in. There's a bit of movement in the bag. And he was shown into the atrium. And the king and his entourage came in. They tell me you've captured the iguana. Yes, Your Majesty, said the boy very respectfully. Show me. He opened the bag, and the furious iguana jumped out, splashed through the pond, frightening the fish, crashed through the bushes. All the birds flew up in a panic, climbed up the eucalyptus tree, and then sat on a branch. And he looked around, and he looked down at the people looking up, and the king looked delighted. And he smelt that distinctive smell of eucalyptus. And he reached out and took a leaf, and well, it's rather nice, actually. One tree is much the same as another. I think I'll stay here then. And he held onto the branch just as he had done on the tree in the middle of the field. But as the king stood there, his grand vizier turned to him and said, you've also offered your daughter's hand in marriage to this peasant. The king was an honourable man and would not go back on his word. But the boy was taken out and washed and dressed in fine clothes, and so he wouldn't look like a peasant when his daughter was brought to him. And he was taken back into the atrium, and he sat on the stone bench and waited. And the princess was sent in with her maids, the maids giggling and looking at the boy. But the princess sat next to him. The boy immediately said to her, I have a bag of gold. I will not make you marry me. Why would you want to marry a peasant? And she said, wait. She said, tell me about your life. And he said, well, no different to anyone really who lives in the village. We play in the fields, we play in the woods, climb trees, we swim in the sea. Everywhere we go. And the princess nodded and said, and all I do is sit in the palace. I'm dressed, I'm fed, I read books. My life is not interesting. Now, clearly, you are a very clever man, and you have had a fine life. I think I would be happy to marry you. And everyone was shocked and amazed, but they were married immediately. And they became king and queen, and the country prospered, and yet again, they lived happily ever after. Thank you. Now we are going to Qom Hamida. Qom Hamida is a thriving town north of Cairo. But there was one time when it was a village. Now imagine, if you will, a square, a dusty square, hot, with a stone bench on one side, and opposite a row of shops. A row of shops which are all open, where the shopkeepers display their wares, those beautiful trays of fruit in different colours, and the meat and the fish, everything laid out beautifully. And there was a shop that sells fabrics, and another that sold spices. And a woman was walking into the square, and the square was hot. And she looked around, and sitting on the bench was a man in a long black cloak with a hood. And she was intrigued, and she thought, on a hot day like this, why is that man sitting there with a cloak on and a hood? And she walked over to inquire, and as the man turned to her, she saw those red eyes of Iblis. And in Egypt, Iblis is the devil. And the devil looked grumpy. A woman of advanced years had no fear of a devil sitting in her square. And she said, Iblis, Iblis, you grace us with your presence, but why so grumpy? Sighed heavily and looked around and said, I have caused havoc in this place. I have set husbands against wives, wives against husbands, children against their parents, dogs against cats, cats against dogs, everything you can imagine. Grandparents are crying because their grandchildren are nasty to them. Absolute chaos. Apart from that man over there. That man over there. And the woman turned. And there was a man outside his shop hanging fabrics over the rail, whistling, smiling happily, about to start his trading day, for he was the happiest man in Kom Hamida. His wife was at home. He was in his shop. He loved selling all these different fabrics to people, hearing their stories. There was nothing the devil could do to make him miserable or angry. And the devil, talking through his teeth, was furious. Well, said the woman, I think you're losing your touch, for I could separate that couple in the blink of an eye. Iblis grunted. I'll show you, she said. Sit and watch. She went home and she bathed and put on her finest dress, and somehow she stood up more straight and regally like a woman of substance, and she marched across the square without looking at Iblis, and she walked into the fabric shop. And she said to the owner, I would like some silk, for I am making a dress for my son's girlfriend. And he started to bring out bolts of fabric and let her feel them and feel the weight and the delicacy. And the silks were the ones that she liked the best. And then she was choosing between the colours, and she chose yellow silk. And this will do, she said, quite sharply. And the shopkeeper wondered what he had done or said to make her suddenly change her mood. She said, sorry, this is not you. This is not your shop. Your material is wonderful. And I am making a dress. I am making a dress for my son's girlfriend. And she looked around as though someone might be listening and said, who is already married. He is shaming my family. Everybody knows about it in our family. And here I am. I can't refuse him. He wants his girlfriend to have a wonderful dress, so I'm buying the material and I will take it home. And she picked up a cup of mint tea from the side, and her hand was shaking quite slightly. And she took a sip, and a drop fell on the corner of the material. He said, oh, I will replace it. And she said, no, that's fine. Just measure it off and cut it, and I will take it. And he measured it in that way, you know, from your nose to your end of your fingers, 3 or 4 times like this. And he cut through. He said, you want me to cut? And he said, no, I'll be cutting that bit out anyway, she said, because I'll cut it up to make the dress, you know, the pattern and so on. And he wrapped it in tissue paper, and she paid for it. And she left the shop. And again, she didn't look over at Iblis sitting on the bench. But she turned and went down an alleyway. And she went down right to the end of the alleyway and down a street until she came to a blue door. And she knocked on the door, and a young woman came to the door, and she said, oh, my dear, what a hot day. Could I trouble you for a glass of water and perhaps a sit down for 10 minutes? And she said, yes, of course, auntie, that term of respect. Come on in. And she came in, she sat on the sofa, and the woman went out in the kitchen to fetch 2 glasses of water. She thought she'd take a break, and she came and sat down too. And what she didn't see was the woman slip the package material underneath the cushion. But then she sat there for 10 minutes and chatted to the young woman and drank her water, and it was quite a pleasant interlude before she begged her leave and set off home. The end of the working day, and the shopkeeper closed up the shop and set off for home. This was one of his favourite times of the day, where he'd had a good day in the shop, sold lots of material, and now he would head home, and he knew as soon as the door opened, he would smell the tagine that his wife would be cooking on the hob, and they would sit down and drink mint tea together. He had a perfect life. And he arrived, he walked down the alleyway and down the street until he came to the room with the blue door. And as he opened the door, he could smell his dinner. And he called out, and his wife came out with a smile on her face, and she already had 2 cups of mint tea. And he sat down on the sofa and he began to drink his tea. And when he put his hand down, he felt a tissue paper. And he thought, what's this? And his wife was talking to him and said, have you had a good day? And dinner will be ready soon. And she's calling from the kitchen as he takes out his parcel. He looks, there is the material. There's the stain from the tea. Could it be that his wife is the girlfriend of this woman? How could this be? His lovely wife was cheating on him with this woman's son. His face went red with confusion and anger. It must be true. How else would that material be here? He sprang to his feet and he went into a kitchen and he started shouting at his wife, who was completely and utterly amazed. He'd never raised his voice to her at all. And he knocked the tagine off the hob and he marched off upstairs. Confused, she cleared up the mess. And later she went up to bed, and there he was, fast asleep, but tense like a rod in the bed. And she climbed in next to him and went to sleep and wondered what might happen the next day. And she woke in the morning and he wasn't next to her, and she could hear him moving around downstairs, and she could hear him slamming doors and drawers and stomping around like an angry man. And heard the front. She winced as the front door slammed as he went out. The old woman was standing next to Iblis, who was still sitting on the stone bench, as the man appeared from the alleyway and walked across the square to his place of business. And they could see his face red with tears and his teeth gritted with anger. And they heard him shouting at his assistant unreasonably and pulling out material and putting it on the racks as though he didn't care what it looked like or what he was doing. And Iblis said, I'm impressed. You have done what I could not do. And yes, said the woman, looking smug, I could turn it back. She clicked her fingers. Just like that. He said, old woman, he said, old woman, you brag. You brag, for that man is a broken man. There is nothing you can do that can change his heart. It is hardened against his wife forever. And he sounded gleeful. And why would it please not feel gleeful at someone else's misery? Well, said the woman, 'perhaps a wager.' 'A wager?' 'Perhaps a wager.' 'A wager?' 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 'A And she took out a purse, and inside the purse were 10 silver coins. She said, 10 silver coins in this purse says that I can change this back. And she clicked her fingers again and placed the purse back in her robe. She set off across the square. The shopkeeper was thumping around in his room, and the assistant was staying out of the way. He'd never seen him like this before, and he was keeping well out of the way. And she came marching in. She came marching in again in her old woman pose, going, oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. And he turned and saw her, and he was a professional shopkeeper. He would not be angry with her. But he kept his composure and said, yes, madam. Oh, she said, oh my goodness me, I need some more silk. More silk, he said. More silk, another dress? She said, no. She said, you won't believe what happened. You won't believe what happened. I set off yesterday and I was overcome with the heat, and I knocked on a door, blue door. A nice young woman came to the door and gave me a glass of water. We had a lovely chat, and because we had a lovely chat and I was sat there, I forgot, and I left the parcel behind, and I'm too embarrassed to go back and fetch it, so I want some more, please. And as she spoke, it dawned on him. This old woman had visited his wife for a drink of water and accidentally left the material behind, and it was nothing to do with her and what he'd done. He called to his assistant. Serve this lady no charge, he said. Serve this lady no charge. And he ran out of the shop and across the square and down the alleyway. And he ran down the street until he got to the blue door, and he rushed in. And his wife saw him come through the door so soon after he'd left for his premises, and she was shocked. But he flung himself onto his knees and he grabbed her legs and he said, wife, how could I have been so foolish? What must you think of me? And he told her about the old woman, and she laughed. She laughed and took him by the shoulders and made him stand, and they hugged, and she said, you foolish man, imagine believing such a crazy story. And all was well again. The old woman left the fabric shop, but Oblis was nowhere to be seen. As she walked across the square toward the stone bench, but there on the stone bench was a pouch, and in the pouch were 10 silver coins, for Iblis always pays his debts. Thank you. Those are my stories.
Oh, they were fantastic stories, Keith.
Thank you very much.
What John said.
I do like telling
What an
them.
evening. Louis, you, of course, have the final judgment. Did you like Keith's stories?
Yes, I do.
They're amazing. Okay.
Well done. I'm sorry I was late, and then I'm sorry my phone went flat, so I'm now in my living room. It was terrific. Well
That's
done.
all right, Michael.
If you look at my fingernails, they're fine.
Okay, I'm gonna.
Right. Well, everyone, that was an amazing session. Thank you for thank you for being the live audience, everyone. And Keith, thank you for stepping in at such. He was actually walking his dog when I asked him to do this.
Down by the canal.
Down by the canal, yes. So there's almost a folk song in there, isn't there? Yeah, I was walking my dog down by the canal. Yes.
So who was it supposed to be, John?
Well, it was supposed to be. Well, it's a complicated thing. It's my head. I had in my head that it was Despina.
Me too.
In fact, I was doing the reason I had her on my mind, as she pointed out, was because I did a podcast with her this morning, and so I'd written Despina in the diary for this morning, and then and of course it all got mixed up in my bonds. And so when Keith, about a month ago or longer, said, could he do tonight? I said, no, I've already promised it to the spinner. So it all worked out in the end.
So meant
It
to
was
And he
well
told the very
done.
stories he asked to tell in the first place.
Great.
So sometimes
Congratulations, John, on getting the festival dates for next year. That's marvellous.
it's all good, isn't it? Now, eventually you'll all be getting letters of invitation. Sally's fantastic. She's going to be doing all this artist liaison thing. I'm just
Great.
going to give her a load of email addresses. So what's coming up? Sunday.
What's coming up? What's coming up? What's coming up?
Sunday. The Baba C's got, you know, he's parked his ego in the corner for the moment, but he's going to take it out. He's going to take it out later in the week. But we'll get to that, Baba C. There's tomorrow. No, Sunday. Nothing tomorrow. Sunday. You all might have things to do tomorrow. I don't know, but nothing to do with the World Storytelling Cafe. So well, I don't know. Maybe Dawn's got something going on in the World Storytelling Cafe tomorrow, but nothing online on the
I've
Storytelling.
got a fire going on.
Oh, that's a nice fire. I shall be in about a week's time. I shall have a fire like that in my Romanian state.
It's cold.
My grandchildren are waving
Anyway,
at
what's
you.
coming up? What's coming up? Sunday, 6 p.m. This very time, our worldwide story round. Please come and tell a story or a poem, or just come on, enjoy yourself, be an audience. And then nothing during the week, but Friday's World Storytelling Day. And Friday, I can't even remember who got on Friday. Some geezer in Washington, D.C. So, yeah, Friday's Baba C. Baba C. And then I had something in my head, and Evita had something in her head. So we combine the two heads, which is probably a recipe for total disaster. But so 10 o'clock in the morning, UK time. Sorry, Baba. But there's we're going to have another story round, but specifically 10 o'clock in the morning. What are we calling it, Evita?
Keep
Life
the
is-
light burning.
Pardon?
Keep the light burning.
Keep the light burning. Keep the light burning. A worldwide story round. Because we don't at the current times, it's very difficult for people in Australia and Singapore and all those feast tellers to join us. So I want to do a program that gives them a chance. Besides, I told them when I saw them, if they wanted to be part of the festival, they had to come and join us and online sometime. And but it's kind of impossible. I haven't done any programs they could possibly join in on.
John,
Yeah.
John, on the night before, on the actual World Storytelling Day, the Irish. If we go through our chat, you can find it. Liz Weir put a link there. If anyone wants to tell, the Irish are doing World Storytelling Day on Friday evening.
Well, after Baba C is finished,
Yes.
mustn't clash with Baba C.
One good thing about next Saturday.
He's very important.
Yes.
One good thing about next Saturday is that because of the time difference, the program starts at 10 a.m. your time, but I don't have to be up at 5 a.m. I can be up at 6 a.m. Well, I get an hour's extra sleep, so I'm happy about that.
Oh yeah. Well, you're always welcome, Baba. So there's loads of stuff going on. Liz,
And then Sunday.
Liz at the moment is in Texas.
Who's in Texas?
Liz Weir.
Oh wow!
She's she's having a little tour of Texas. She's doing
San Antonio,
at Denton at the moment, which is the Texas Storytelling Festival.
Mm-hmm.
I did years in Texas. They never invited me to Denton, but then I was hanging out with all those hill country hippies. So
Right,
no,
guys, I'm gonna go. I'll see you later.
see you, Michael.
Bye bye.
Good to see you.
Bye bye.
Yeah, well, he probably wants to catch the bus.
Oh God, no. Well,
Thanks again, Keith. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.
Take care.
Thanks very much, Keith. Bye.
Right. Anyway, so Liz is in Texas doing stuff. So anyway, but you've all been brilliant. Keith, you've been fantastic.
Thank
See you
you.
on Sunday. Undoubtedly, we'll see you on Sunday.
See you Sunday. Yeah.
And meanwhile, have a wonderful weekend, everyone.
Thank